Before all the glitter and glamour of that climactic moment, showgirl contestants must undergo the rigours of selection. This year's hopefuls gathered at the City Hall last night to face a panel of judges. The young women aged from 18 to 25 are judged on appearance, personality, presentation, general knowledge, speech, deportment, style and grooming. It's a tall order, but the winner will be the region's ambassador at zone-level competition and possibly the Royal Easter Show in Sydney. For the winners of each section, there's a whirl of dinner dances, travel packages, cash, clothes and jewellery. But these eager entrants will have to wait for the crowning ceremony at the show later this month to find out who the winner will be.
Good morning, Director Assistants.
Number, please. What's your number, please?
These telecom workers are the people who provide you with directory assistance. The exchange at Hamilton is some distance from the shops, so most workers buy snacks from this stall. The women who run it make a profit, but instead of keeping the extra money, they donate it to various charities.
The staff at this centre are very good fundraisers. Over 17 years they've raised about $28,000.
Today they presented the Hunter breast screening unit with television and video equipment worth more than $3,000. It will be used to make training videos for staff at the Mater Clinic.
Donation of the money for this equipment is yet another example of the Hunters community's attitude to getting things right. If they can see that something can be improved over and above the minimum government contribution, they do it and they get the rewards.
Dr Forbes believes the training videos may be used at other breast cancer screening centres across Australia. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
It seemed like a great idea 2 months ago. Anthony and Glenda Grushin reckoned that since the heavens refused to provide the rain so desperately needed for their parched property, they'd beat Mother Nature at her own game and buy an irrigation system. So they placed an order for a $30,000 state-of-the-art machine, which was finally delivered yesterday.
Just a bit too late by a week.
A bit late, all right. In a case of classic bad timing, the Grushins were checking out the answer to their irrigating prayers just as their fields were being swallowed up by one of the worst floods in the area in 20 years. What do you think the other farmers think of you taking delivery of an irrigator in the height of a flood?
Mad.
While the Grushins can laugh at the timing of the irrigator's delivery, they're worried about losing their stock feed.
In terms of, it would be in the thousands somewhere, thousands of dollars.
As they wait for the lake to give way to the green grass of home again, the Grushins reckon the irrigator will be relegated to the shed. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Dino West farmers are working at the very heart of the mining industry.
If we don't get the material blasted properly, reduced from big to small, the mines can't dig it.
Okay. Technology in the explosives industry is continually on the move, and the new $5.5 million centre at Mount Thorley is designed to keep in touch with this. Along with what makes it go bang, engineers are also studying the effects of explosives on surrounding districts. This environmental aspect was the underlying winner for Singleton Council.
Environmentally acceptable. In fact, the company have a policy of environmental controls, and that certainly suits the area itself and the people. So we're very pleased at the developments here.
A similar project in the Cessnock district was met with considerable community animosity. 420,000 tonnes of explosives are sold in Australia each year, with only 4 companies vying for the work. Dino West farmers are hoping to win their fair share of the market. What better place to launch a book on World War II than the local RSL club? Frank Bryant has retired from business to live in Muswellbrook. With his spare time, he's been reliving some special memories.
There have been many millions of words written about the war and they're all serious. I thought it was time we took a light-hearted look at it, perhaps.
Frank was a flight engineer in the Royal Air Force flying in bombing raids over Germany. In retrospect, there were some bizarre moments.
I remember the time we had a mid-air collision, for example, over England. We landed, ran off the end of the runway, collected a barbed wire fence on our tailplane and flew back to base with a barbed wire fence on the tailplane. Unheard of, but it happened.
As a prisoner of war, Frank also has some light-hearted memories, like the time he stole the pennant from Hermann Goering's staff car, watched by thousands of Allied prisoners. Frank still has that memento. The 68-year-old says the war was stupid and vicious, but beyond that, as the title of the book suggests, there was always bloody something to give the fighting men a lift.
The two unladen semis collided just after 6:30 on the highway, 5 kilometres south of O'Sullivan's Gap.
It's through a narrow section, both vehicles coming off mountains. At this stage it looks like it's just been unlucky where they've met in the middle. The northbound truck's drifted across the road.
The force of the crash caused one of the vehicles to jackknife and career off the road. The truck's cabin took the brunt of the impact, trapping the driver by the legs.
The young bloke driving the southbound truck was very lucky to get out of it. He appears, at first they thought he was badly injured, but it appears that he's all right at this stage.
The Victorian driver was freed and airlifted by the rescue helicopter to the John Hunter Hospital. Traffic was disrupted at intervals as the vehicles were salvaged. Police accident investigation officers will interview and possibly charge the Queensland driver of a semi-trailer that was involved in a fatal accident south of the town last Sunday. 2 elderly people were killed when a semi veered to the wrong side of the road and slammed into their station wagon towing a caravan. Andrew Lobb, NBN News.
In its time, just after World War II, the Vampire jet was our frontline fighter. Its twin tails and bulbous body looked clumsy compared to modern jet fighters, but the rugged little aircraft was a familiar sight over Australian Air Force bases right up until the 70s. There are now precious few Vampires remaining. This one at RAF Base Williamtown has been restored to something like its original condition. For a number of fighter pilots at the base, the sight of the old warplane brought back many memories.
Oh, it certainly does. It was the most magnificent aircraft in its day, and I had many an enjoyable flight.
The Vampire will now be swapped with another in mint condition at RAF Base Amberley to be put on permanent display at the Williamtown Fighter World Museum. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
They say if you remember the 60s, you just weren't there. Well, lucky for the surfboard riders of the day, there was a young filmmaker around called Bruce Brown, who happened to capture much of that time in a series of classic surf movies, including Endless Summer, Barefoot Adventure and Surf Crazy. All the Bruce Brown movies have just been re-released on video, which is cause to celebrate for the growing band of longboard riders around the world. In Nambucca Heads, they're bringing out the big guns to mark the occasion.
The Bruce Brown movies were really the first surfing movies ever made. Showed the expeditions to Hawaii and Mexico. Really brought it to a head, the surfing of the era.
The local Loggerheads Malibu Club is hosting a 60s surf rally this weekend, with a 2-day contest open only to genuine 60s vintage longboards. A special feature will be a show and shine of classic surfboards and memorabilia at the Nambucca Hotel on Saturday afternoon.
We're starting to get a lot of people come back to the beach because their young sons and daughters is taking up surfing, and Dad used to be a surfer back then, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the west in the hills that have got one at Malibu hanging up in their garage somewhere. It'll come out of the cobwebs this weekend.
This is what's left of Tom Wright's grama, pumpkin and melon crop, thousands of dollars worth of product rotting into the ground.
It's our next 6 months' income at least.
Tom's 30-hectare property at Morpeth was completely covered by the floods. He had held off picking his crop for a fortnight, waiting for a touch of rain, but that delay proved costly. Also rotting in the fields, hectares of lucerne which were to be cut for hay. Tom's story is one repeated along the river at Phoenix Park and Hinton. The locals say every 4 or 5 years they cop a dousing from a flood, but it's a problem they believe can easily be solved.
I think possibly redesign some of the levee banks around here, because it was only a small flood in comparison to some we've had, that a little bit on the levee banks would stop it coming over.
While the farmers want the banks along the river raised up to a metre, Maitland Council is undergoing a flood mitigation study to look at any possible changes. But a spokesperson said the levee system had cut floods by more than 3/4 since brought in 30 years ago, and any changes would have to fit into a complicated and precise design program. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The final safety job, a concrete median strip, has been completed. The package also includes steep descent warning signs, flashing lights and speed restrictions for buses and trucks. The latest measure is designed to force an out-of-control heavy vehicle into an emergency stopping bay instead of it continuing down the highway into the village of Moonby. The Roads Minister, Wald Murray, as well as representatives of the RTA, the emergency services and Moonby residents inspected the completed project and were given a first-hand look at how effectively the system works. Until today, some were unconvinced that the truck arrestor bed was a safe alternative to safety ramps. However, a staunch opponent of the bed has now changed his mind after being a passenger in the truck.
We slowed down extremely gently, that passengers in a coach or a truck loaded with light goods would probably not dislodge its load at all. It was quite amazing, actually.
And for the village itself, residents are resting easier, free from the fear of further truck crashes in Moonby.
It has been expressed to me many times that the people are noticing the effect of the trucks slowing down.
The 41 works in the Challenge exhibition represents a significant achievement for the artists. It's the best exhibition of the works to be staged, and the result is stunning.
I think most of all, we've had just the pure delight and inspiration because of the colour and the structure of the paintings. I think it lacks perhaps the inhibitions of other artists.
The exhibition at the Armidale Gallery runs until March 15. Already, more than half of the works have been sold. The success of the show is likely to see it repeated next year.
These Texan Angoras arriving at the Waite's Magura stud are from the progeny of 2 bucks and does the Waite's imported from the United States in 1984. To meet strict quarantine requirements, the original goats lived in quarantine stations on the Cocos Islands and in South Australia, and finally in Inverell, where they were destroyed to ensure no disease was imported.
Mainly they were put, the quarantine regulations were that they had to be from a scrapie-free herd in America, and also they had to be foot and mouth and blue tongue free. And the scrapie, the original thing on the scrapies was that we had to have 5 live animals from the original imports to live for 5 years in quarantine. And the first two years of quarantine on Torres Island, the animals didn't breed quite so well, so that's why it's sort of turned into an 8-year program.
It's the first Texan Angora blood in many years to be introduced to the Australian flock.
The biggest benefit we're going to get is in the bales. Our fleece weight production should increase by double, and just with overall coverage, and the grease in the fibre will keep the weather out, and possibly maybe in Burry country it will keep the burrs out, a bit like the grease in the sheep industry.
The bridge over the Mukai River east of Gunnedah was built in the 30s. The ever-increasing volume of traffic on the Oxley Highway, particularly heavy vehicles, has left it outdated and inadequate. It's now showing its age and bends under the weight of traffic. Tens of thousands of dollars are needed for repairs.
We've come up with an option now to take a road off just south of Gunnedah for about 3.6k around over the floodplain to link up with the existing highway. About $5.6 million it'll cost. Now, it'll be a number of bridges, not just the one.
The bridge is also prone to flooding. It was closed by floodwaters most of this week. The reopened crossing will not solve the problem.
It's not going to be flood-free. You cannot make such an enormous floodplain flood-free, but it will be a lot flood-freer than it is at the moment, and it'll be much more safe to travel than it is at the moment.
Plans for the bridge will go on public display in the Gunnedah Council chambers for public comment. It will then be the subject of an environmental impact study. As yet, no date has been set for construction to start.
I don't know. It's a case of when the responses come in, if there are any problems in relation to the EIS, and when we get the available money for it. But it'll be as soon as we can do the job.
In almost a century of ever-changing fads and fashions, the one constant in Newcastle's entertainment calendar has been the show. And while people are currently having to watch their every dollar, the show's organisers are hopeful that the 4-day event will attract an even larger crowd than last year's 140,000.
The records indicate that sort of in recessionary times that people tend to patronise a function such as the show, where, as I say, we believe they're getting value for money.
At a preview today of what's on at this year's show, major sponsors, the St George Building Society, outlined a program that includes everything from street theatre to the more traditional ring events. But the focus of the 1992 show will be the new $13 million exhibition centre, which is expected to be completed next week.
Well, I think it's a show within a show, really. There are 180 exhibition spaces in there, of which have been taken up by 125, I think, individual exhibitors.
The personal experience of war isn't easily captured by newsreel documentaries or the work of war historians, but labouring quietly in the wings of the great theatres of war were the official war artists.
The artist is putting his own personal feelings and emotions onto the canvas. And the feelings are very present, especially in the death and burial scenes and the ones of the soldiers waiting. You can really feel the emotion and the pain present in the works.
The exhibition is entitled Send Me More Paint, a reference to the wartime scarcity of artist materials. The works are all part of the Canberra War Memorial collection. Often the artists were intimately involved in the action. Murray Griffith and Harold Abbott were both captured by the Japanese. Their works record those experiences. Others, like legendary cameraman Damien Parra, eventually made the ultimate sacrifice to record images which are now part of Australian folklore. But the home front is also explored in Sybil Craig's vibrant images of women at work in a munitions factory and in Dobell's priceless portrait of the belligerent Civil Construction Corps worker Joe Westcott, the Billy Boy. The exhibition opens this evening and will no doubt bring back powerful emotions for Australians old enough to have been caught up in the world's greatest conflict, and amid the nostalgia is a powerful record of sacrifice. Stella Bowen's portrait of an Australian bomber crew takes on a deeper significance when we realise that only one of those men survived the war. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
Reducing the incidence of heart disease. That's one of the aims of the National Heart Foundation. Today it gave research grants to 7 hunter-based studies. One of the projects focuses on excess body weight. Having a pot belly or beer gut increases the chance of developing a heart problem.
It's particularly bad here in the hunter. So we'll be trialling a major project to look at reducing beer guts in the hunter.
Dr. Wendy Brown from the Centre for Disease Prevention has been given a grant to investigate why women from non-English speaking backgrounds have poorer cardiovascular health than the general community.
We're going to develop a program which will help middle-aged migrant women from Europe to change their exercise and dietary habits so that their risk of cardiac disease is lessened.
In his role as Assistant Development Officer with the Knights, Big Sarge was casting an eye over the Harold Matthews trialist at Wangi, with the young players hoping to win a spot in the final team. In other matches, Manly played the Knights in the Jersey Flegg and SG ball squads. And after having a lean season last year, the Junior Eagles looked all right, scoring plenty of points.
Despite resignation calls, David Stark said he will not vacate his position on the Armidale Council Development Corporation. His recent move to Moree means he is not always available to attend council meetings, but said he was elected to assist the mayor and believes he is fulfilling his function. Other members of council disagree, believing aldermen should be involved in Armidale and the community wholeheartedly in order to deal with local problems and be accessible to the public.
Those people who are on a local council ought to have a close and maintain a close working relationship with the community they serve.
Should Alderman Stark be removed, his seat on council would be decided through a by-election.
Almost 2 weeks of rain created a nightmare for track staff trying to prepare the surface for the New South Wales Street Stock Sedan title and the State 500cc crown. And 12 drivers soon found out how difficult the track was. Singleton's Gary Thorley, the youngest competitor in the race, was victorious in the Formula 500cc event, keeping a family tradition well and truly alive, but even more drama after the finish. Lismore's Shane Newstead withstood many stoppages and restarts to claim the State Street Stock Sedan title. The second year in a row it's gone north to Lismore. Out of all the prangs, fortunately, no one was hurt.
The Sydney University study found the number of Aborigines jailed has risen by 25% in the 4 years to last June, far outstripping the general increase in the prison population. Between June 1987 and June 1991, the number of Aboriginal prisoners increased by 80% in New South Wales, 75% in Victoria and 24% in Western Australia. The findings have prompted calls for urgent action to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission. State governments have promised to finalise their responses by next month, 3 years after the Royal Commission halted investigations and more than a year after its final report was tabled. Federal Aboriginal Affairs Minister Robert Tickner says the disproportionate number of Aborigines in prison can only be addressed by tackling underlying issues such as education, unemployment, youth policy and substance abuse.
For someone who started his working life on the sea, Sid spent a lot of time up in the air, working for Qantas for 25 years.
It was during the war
that whether I liked it or not, I just had to go flying on several occasions, being moved from one place to another. And I liked it so much, and I thought, well, this is not so frightening as I thought it was.
The next thing Sid knew, he was on a flying boat. From Rose Bay, he was off on Sunderlands, Catalinas and Lancastrians for the Pacific and Southeast Asian runs.
They were converted bombers, that's pure and simply it. And I'll never forget the discomfort that I experienced on those things.
With aircraft heavily laden with fuel, passengers sat with tin trays and blankets on their knees for 16-hour flights. The stewards huddled in what had been gun turrets.
I took my old Air Force greatcoat with me, a very big heavy woolen scarf, and that's how I used to serve the food to the passengers going across to Noumea. It was absolutely freezing.
Sid used to signal to his wife Anne on the return from a long trip.
I used to open the hatch and stream this toilet roll out for the wife to see. She'd know it was me coming in.
Sid says they were spit and polished, flying by the seat of your pants days. He waited on Gypsy Rose Lee, Frank Sinatra, Betty Cuthbert, the Nyazan of Hyderabad, and a young Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh.
I didn't have so much to do with the Queen herself, but the Duke was quite a down-to-earth character. He used to stop and have a chat. Now, what have we got cooking today?
The Duke complimented Sid on his roast beef.
He held up the Queen, there she was waiting for him, and he was wanting to know where the meat came from and all the ins and outs.
Sid attained the rank of Senior Passenger Officer and later Development Officer. He was Chief Steward on Qantas's first around-the-world flight. He says if he could, he would live his life over again.
Yes, I would. It had its rough periods, especially when engines iced up over the Alps and you wondered whether you were going to walk from the top of Mont Blanc downwards. Yes, that's happened. Yes, I would do it again. Yeah.
Barbara Ridgway and her newborn baby were doing fine today after an early morning panic. Barbara woke at 5 with contractions. Her 7-year-old daughter called an ambulance. But they were only kilometres down the road when baby Jasmine Lee decided she was ready to meet the world.
They had to stop along the highway and deliver it. So it was different.
Ambulance officers delivered a perfectly healthy 3.2 kilo baby at around 7 o'clock. Proud relatives doted over the family's new addition, but although Mum is happy everything is okay, the rushed delivery has turned her off having any more. Belmont Hospital staff say about once a year they have a baby born in an ambulance, taxi or car on the way to the labour ward.
Work in Beardy Street started early this morning. The block between Marsh and Faulkner Streets will be given a facelift to bring it in line with the mall to the west.
It's going to be a people place, as the other little mall has been. Everybody enjoys eating their lunch out in the sunshine and walking free of traffic. This one will have a small road through it. Ultimately, perhaps, we may be able to mall it completely.
Work is scheduled for completion by Easter. Businesses in the street are helping council pay for the project, contributing $130,000. Despite criticism from some quarters for extending the mall, Alderman Leach says it can only benefit the business community.
This happened when the first mall was built too, and it hasn't proved so. Now people are actually urgently trying to get a business in the main mall. That's where the highest rents are paid, and it certainly hasn't affected their business, including the paper shop. There will be some 10-minute parking spots within the new mall, and there's, of course, I believe, very adequate parking behind the mall, so that I don't think it'll present any problems. Of course, it may take some people a little while to get used to it.
It was thought to be a slick marketing move, getting the fights to the track, but in Armidale, the fight in the court has them down for the count.
Not a lot of dollars in it for us without selling the beers and the food.
The Armidale Jockey Club says it was refused the liquor licence because the fight was not thought to be a function for the benefit of the club. Adding to the controversy, while Armidale has had a knockback, the Queanbeyan Jockey Club has had its licence approved. Of the 40 country clubs in New South Wales, 10 already have what's called a governor's licence, which will carry them through. The remaining 30 must get permission to serve alcohol on non-race days.
I think it's a matter of the different courts ruling their own decisions.
The Fannick-Nelson battle is set down for March the 1st. Tonight, the country clubs, including Newcastle and Tamworth, are in limbo, waiting for a ruling. According to the promoters Mordy's, they'll take the matter further, fighting any threat to make it a dry show. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
An ambulance retrieval team moved the young man from Armidale Hospital to the airport, where the RAAF personnel took over. The 22-year-old, who was in the Navy, received fractures to the neck and spine in a motorbike accident on Sunday. He was in Cretchfield Tongs to ensure his spine was unable to move. A hospital spokesman said he was in a stable condition and was being transferred to the repatriation hospital in Sydney.